In the blistering heat of 1931, a retired physician falls through the floor of the Mojave Desert and into the dark. When he finally stops tumbling, he turns on his flashlight and sweeps the beam across the walls of an underground cavern. What the light reveals is not an empty geological anomaly, but a meticulously carved space. And according to his later accounts, he is not alone in the dark. He is surrounded by the mummified remains of people who stood over 8 feet tall, dressed in tailored animal skins, resting in a complex of tunnels that stretches for more than 30 miles beneath one of the most hostile environments on the planet. For years, he keeps the secret. When he finally brings it to the public in 1947, the world pays attention, investors line up, and an expedition is planned. And then, the story abruptly vanishes. The artifacts are never produced, and the man himself disappears, leaving behind only an abandoned car in the desert sun. Today we are going to look at the official report of this impossible discovery, at what the indigenous people of the region said long before it, at what the archives do and do not contain, and at the ground where it all supposedly happened. The question we have to answer is simple but profound. Did a desperate man invent a subterranean empire out of thin air to make a quick dollar? Or was he silenced because he stumbled into a physical reality that had been preserved in oral tradition for centuries? To understand the weight of what happened, you first have to understand the world above ground. The Mojave Desert, and specifically the area bordering Death Valley, is a landscape that actively defies human survival. It is an ocean of sand, salt flats, and jagged mountains where the temperature can easily exceed 130 degrees. It is a place that strips away the unnecessary, where evaporation happens so quickly that sweat disappears before you can even feel it. Yet, long before any newspaper was printed, before any official mapping expedition arrived from the east, the people who lived in and around this valley already knew the landscape intimately. The Paiute people possessed a deep, practical understanding of the mountains and the scarce water sources, and woven into their daily survival was a geographical tradition that they treated with a caution that had nothing to do with fear of the dark. The story was not written down, it was spoken, from grandparent to grandchild, always with the same warning and always with the same strange details. They spoke of a place called Shin, an underground kingdom located beneath the Panamint Mountains and the borders of Death Valley. According to the oral tradition, a great chief of the ancient times lost his wife and, in his grief, wandered into the desolate mountains. He discovered a hidden cave and followed it deep into the earth. The passage went on for miles, twisting downward until it opened into a staggering subterranean valley. The chief described a place lit by a pale, greenish light, though there was no sun. He saw people living there, people who were exceptionally tall, fair-skinned, and dressed in clothing made from unfamiliar materials. They spoke a language he did not understand and wielded strange spears. The chief was eventually guided back to the surface by these guardians, returning to his people with a story that would be passed down for hundreds of years. To us, sitting in the comfort of the modern world, it sounds like folklore, a beautiful but purely mythical narrative of the underworld. But to the people who lived off that land every single day, it was not a fairy tale. It was practical knowledge. In the 1920s, a respected Paiute guide named Tom Wilson actually spoke of this place to visiting mining engineers. He claimed his own grandfather had rediscovered the entrance to Shin, wandering into the tunnels and seeing the pale lights and the tall people himself before fleeing back to the surface. To the Paiute, this was history, kept alive by voice. We tend to view oral traditions as primitive, but they are often highly accurate geographical maps, encoding the locations of resources, dangers, and historical events in a format that survives much longer than paper. If you enjoy stories the history books quietly skipped, consider subscribing, because this channel lives on them. We are going to look at what the second account actually says, at the physical evidence that was allegedly pulled from the site, at why the official version leaves so much unexplained, and at what the people who were actually there believed until their last day. Because years later, a completely different group of people arrived, and what they recorded should not have matched the ancient legend at all, but it did. The year is 1931. The United States is firmly in the grip of the Great Depression. Men from all over the country are pouring into the western deserts, driven by desperation and the faint hope of finding gold or forgotten mining claims. Among them is Dr. F. Bruce Russell, a retired physician from Cincinnati, Ohio. According to his own account, Russell is out sinking shafts for mining claims near the California and Nevada border, somewhere in the harsh terrain bordering Death Valley and the Mojave. He is probing the earth, looking for fractures or veins of valuable minerals. Instead, the ground gives way beneath his feet. He falls into a deep, natural shaft. When he recovers and illuminates the space around him, he realizes he has not just found a cave. He has found a complex. What follows is an exploration that supposedly spans years. Russell claims he kept the location secret, returning multiple times and eventually bringing in a colleague, Dr. Daniel S. Bovee, who had extensive experience in archaeological excavations in Mexico. Together, they map the underworld, and what they describe defies every established timeline of human habitation in North America. They report mapping over 32 miles of interconnected tunnels. These are not rough, natural limestone tubes, but passages that show signs of deliberate expansion and engineering. Deep within the complex, they claim to have found a series of massive chambers. One of them, which they described as a ritual or tribal hall, contained the mummified remains of people who were 8 to 9 feet tall. The mummies were remarkably well preserved by the extreme, arid conditions of the deep desert. But it was not just their height that was impossible. Russell and Bovee reported that the remains were wrapped in fine, tailored garments made from the skins of animals that were completely unknown to the region, including patterns that resembled the pelts of extinct mammals. The deeper they went, the stranger the artifacts became. They described finding cooking areas with utensils made of a metal that resembled a cross between copper and bronze, but which they could not definitively identify. They found massive stone doors, perfectly balanced on unseen hinges, similar to the ancient stonework found in the Andes. And perhaps most startling of all, they claimed the walls of the main chambers were covered in hieroglyphs. The symbols did not resemble any known Native American petroglyphs or pictographs. Instead, Russell stated they looked eerily similar to ancient Egyptian or Phoenician scripts. For 16 years, they supposedly sat on this discovery, quietly removing a few small artifacts and trying to secure funding for a massive, full-scale excavation. Then, in August of 1947, they went public. They hired a spokesman named Howard E. Hill, who delivered a sensational speech before the Los Angeles Transportation Club, which was immediately picked up by the San Diego Union and newspapers across the country. The timing was electric. It was the summer of 1947. Just weeks after the infamous Roswell incident, and the American public was primed for stories of the impossible and the unknown. Hill described the underground city in vivid detail, announcing that Russell and Bovee had formed a corporation, Amazing Explorations Incorporated, and were actively seeking investors to fund the extraction of the giant mummies and the ancient gold they believed was hidden deeper in the caves. This is the moment the whole case turns. Because if what Russell and Bovee described was true, then the history of North America was not just incomplete, it was entirely wrong. The announcement promised that physical proof would be brought to the surface within weeks. Prominent academics were allegedly invited to view the site, and yet, almost as soon as the story exploded, it hit a brick wall. The official explanation was simple, and for a while, everyone accepted it as the final word. But it left 3 things completely unexplained, and those 3 things are still unexplained today. To understand what really happened here, we have to look at the evidence itself, piece by piece, and weigh the official denial against the quiet details that refuse to fade. The skeptical argument against Dr. F. Bruce Russell is brutal, efficient, and entirely logical. From the perspective of mainstream archaeology, the entire 1947 affair has all the classic hallmarks of a mid-century grift. Look at the mechanics of the announcement. Russell and his associates did not bring a body to a university. They did not produce a piece of the unknown metal for independent metallurgical testing. They brought a story to the press and immediately followed it with an offer to sell shares in Amazing Explorations Incorporated. In the harsh light of historical analysis, this is the signature of a scam. You create a sensational story, you generate a media frenzy, you collect investment money to fund the supposed expedition, and then you invent a convenient reason why the expedition has to be delayed or canceled, walking away with the cash. Furthermore, the Smithsonian Institution, the ultimate authority on American antiquities, was supposedly contacted about the find. Their official stance, both then and now, is absolute. They have no record of these giant mummies. They sent no researchers to the Mojave to verify the claims, because they viewed the claims as entirely baseless. To the academic establishment, an 8-foot-tall race of humans wearing tailored, extinct animal skins and writing in Egyptian hieroglyphs beneath California is biological and historical nonsense. Human gigantism exists, but an entire distinct race of giants does not appear in the fossil record without leaving massive evolutionary footprints. For the skeptical mind, the case is closed. It was a newspaper hoax designed to part fools from their money, born in the fertile, conspiracy-hungry summer of 1947. But here is where the story stops being simple. Because when you strip away the circus of the press conference and look at the quiet details, you find things that a con man from Ohio should not have known. Look at the geography. The skeptics claimed that massive 30-mile cave systems do not exist in the geological makeup of the Mojave and Death Valley borderlands. But modern geology tells a more nuanced story. The Panamint and Grapevine Mountains contain significant limestone deposits. Over millions of years, water seeping through limestone creates karst topography, massive networks of subterranean caves and voids. While a 30-mile continuous tunnel might be an exaggeration, the presence of deep, unmapped cavern systems in that exact region is a documented geological fact. There are sinkholes and vertical shafts hidden in those mountains that modern explorers are still discovering today. Russell's claim of falling through a natural shaft into a cave system is entirely within the realm of physical possibility. Now look at the cultural collision. Russell and Bovey were outsiders. They were men of the industrial Midwest and the academic East Coast. In 1931, there was no internet, and the highly specific oral traditions of the Paiute people were not cataloged in local libraries for anyone to casually browse. Yet, the specific details Russell wrote down in his account perfectly mirrored the legend of Shin Av. The Paiute spoke of a deep cavern in those specific mountains. Russell claimed to find it there. The Paiute spoke of a race of unusually tall, fair people. Russell claimed the mummies were between 8 and 9 feet tall. The Paiute spoke of strange clothing and spears. Russell described unknown animal skins and advanced metallurgical tools. Here is the part that should not be possible. If Russell was simply making up a story to sell fake mining shares, why would he invent a highly specific narrative that perfectly aligned with a local indigenous tradition he likely had no access to? A typical gold scam involves a lost Spanish mine or a cursed prospector's vein. It does not usually involve giant mummies and hieroglyphs that match the exact warning the grandmothers of the local tribes had been repeating for generations. Coincidence stops being a comfortable word here. And then there is the disappearance. If this was a standard financial grift, the script dictates that the grifter takes the money and flees to a comfortable life in another state under a new name. But that is not what happened to Dr. F. Bruce Russell. After the media explosion in August of 1947, the trail goes violently cold. Amazing Explorations Incorporated never became a massive financial powerhouse. The investors did not reap millions, but neither did Russell. Months after the story broke, Russell's car was reportedly found abandoned deep in the desert of the Death Valley region. The radiator had boiled over. His personal belongings were still inside. Of Dr. F. Bruce Russell himself, there was no trace. He simply vanished into the landscape he claimed held the secrets of the ancients. Following his disappearance, local rumors began to circulate that the federal government had quietly stepped in. Stories emerged from desert prospectors that men in unmarked vehicles had been seen in the Grapevine Mountains, and that specific canyons had been closed off or intentionally collapsed with explosives. The official record holds no paper trail of any government intervention, but absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially in an era where the military and government were securing massive tracts of the southwestern deserts for nuclear testing and classified projects. Ask yourself why a supposedly transparent hoax would require the sudden disappearance of its author and the persistent local memory of federal agents sealing the earth. Everything now points in one direction. The legend, the report, the geology, and the sudden silence. They all intersect at a single point on the map. And the thing they agree on is the one thing no one wanted to be true. So, what actually happened out there in the heat of 1931? And why did it end so quietly in 1947? After everything we have seen, it is finally possible to say. So here is what actually happened. Not the pure, untainted legend, not the sterile official line, but the version every piece of evidence finally points to. Dr. F. Bruce Russell did not invent the caves. He found them. The most historically sound explanation is a collision between genuine discovery and human greed. In 1931, it is highly probable that Russell did fall into a karst limestone shaft in the Panamint or Grapevine Mountains. It is highly probable that he stumbled into a pristine, undisturbed, indigenous burial complex. The arid, stable climate of deep desert caves is a natural mummification chamber. It preserves bone, skin, and textile for thousands of years with terrifying clarity. Russell likely found the remains of ancient native people, surrounded by their sacred artifacts, petroglyphs, and burial offerings. He likely found the physical origin of the Shin legend, the literal resting place of the tall ancestors the Paiute remembered in their oral traditions. But Russell was a man of his time, looking for a way to matter. A native burial cave, while archaeologically priceless, is not something you can easily sell shares in to an American public hungry for pulp adventures. So, over the 16 years he kept the secret, the truth was stretched. A tall, naturally mummified warrior became an 8-foot giant. Native petroglyphs became Egyptian hieroglyphs. A large cavern system became 32 miles of engineered tunnels. By the time he and Bovey brought it to Howard E. Hill in 1947, they had taken a genuine, breathtaking archaeological site and painted it with the brush of a circus sideshow to secure funding. The tragedy of the Mojave catacombs is not that they were entirely fake, but that the truth was buried beneath a layer of commercial sensationalism. The legend and the report were never truly in conflict. They were describing the same physical reality from two ends of a century, one as a sacred memory, the other as a corrupted record. What connected them was real. Think back to the matching details no outsider could have known. The geographical alignment, the specific descriptions of the clothing. Each one alone could be dismissed. Together, they leave almost no room for doubt that Russell saw something extraordinary before he tainted it. And because he tainted it, the academic establishment did exactly what it was designed to do. It shut the door. The Smithsonian and the major universities, protecting the rigorous standards of modern archaeology, looked at the corporate shares and the claims of Egyptian giants, and they refused to engage. They threw out the invaluable artifact because of the cheap wrapping paper. When Russell disappeared, whether to the elements of the unforgiving desert or by a quiet intervention to secure the land for government use, the location died with him. We cannot prove every last detail. No one can at this distance in time. We do not know if the caves were later found and sealed by institutions protecting their timelines, or if they simply wait out there in the dark, their entrances covered by a century of shifting sand. But of every explanation ever offered, the idea that a desperate man found a sacred truth and tried to sell it is the only one that leaves nothing unaccounted for. And that means the people who lived along that river and across those salt flats were right all along. They were not superstitious. They were not telling fairy tales around the fire. They were remembering. But the answer is not really where this story ends, because what it tells us about ourselves is the part that lingers long after the names of the men involved fade into the archives. We live in an era that demands paper. We want photographs, peer-reviewed journals, and GPS coordinates. If an event or a place is not cataloged in an official institutional archive, we are conditioned to believe it does not exist. We look at the blank spaces on the map and assume they are truly empty, simply because a surveyor has not placed a flag there. But the Earth does not care about our archives. The desert is a vault of unimaginable scale. It swallows rivers, it grinds mountains into dust, and it can easily hide the history of an entire people beneath a few feet of limestone and sand. Maybe the real lesson here is not about what exactly happened in that cavern in 1931. It is about how much we lose when we call something a legend and stop listening. The indigenous people of the Mojave were trying to tell outsiders the truth about their land for 100 years, preserving a historical record through the most fragile medium possible, the human voice. And instead of listening, we waited for a man from Ohio to tell us he found it, and then we lost it all over again because he tried to put a price tag on it. Some doors, once someone warns you about them, you never walk past the same way again. Remember that image we started with, the abandoned car rusting in the blinding heat of the Mojave Desert? Its driver vanished, the sand slowly covering the tire tracks. Look at it again now. It is not just the end of a mystery. It is a monument to the fact that the past is never fully conquered, and that the ground beneath our feet still holds secrets that can rewrite everything we think we know. So I want to ask you this. Is there a story like this where you grew up? A place, a local warning, something everyone in the area knew but no official record could ever prove? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and the comments under these videos are half the reason I make them. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, the ones the history books quietly skipped because they were too complicated or too strange, then subscribe. That is the only way you will catch the next one, and there are stranger ones coming. If it kept you here to the end, a like genuinely helps more people find the channel. That is not a small thing. It is the whole reason independent investigations like this survive. Thank you for staying with me all the way through the dark. Keep asking why the quiet places are quiet, and I will see you in the next one.